So the floor is open. Some people are coming to watch the show, and some people have to provide the show. Yeah.
So I wonder if the Rav can offer what one should have in his mind while davening, specifically the Shema Prayer and the Shema. So whether it's maybe experimentation or more depth, more depth of the bracha itself, or whether it should be some kind of more spiritual.
The Shema and the Tefillah, the Shema Esrei, are texts that are infinitely deep. And that means that the choice of what to concentrate on is going to be personal. It's not going to be the same for everyone. One challenge that everyone faces is paying attention. You should say something 3 times a day, day after day, year after year. It's very easy to become habitual and to be done on automatic pilot. So one very important criterion is, if I choose to concentrate on X, will I be successful in concentrating on X rather than saying it unconsciously? I find one category that's powerful in that respect. Again, this is a comment on psychology. You should ask other people. It won't be true for everybody. One category that is helpful is to make it personal. So sometimes making it personal is trivial. You know, you're asking for health and healing, which is the way the Art Scroll puts it, which happens to be exactly correct. Well, health and healing, everyone knows people who are ill, knows about people who are ill. Most people's health isn't perfect. And, as I'm often asked, but Rabbi, I am healthy. What do I need to pray for health for? And the answer is, it's not true that you are healthy. It's true that you have been healthy. But you don't have it in your pocket. You don't own it. It's not guaranteed. You know very well that in an instant it can change. So even if you have been healthy up until this moment, it's quite reasonable to pray to continue to be healthy. So that's easy to make personal because a lot of your personal life is affected by things like that. When you're praying for parnasa, so if you're still in the cocoon of being students and being supported by your parents, congratulations, someday you'll get to the real world. But that's something also that's easy to make personal. If you talk about God should fight our battles and save us from our enemies, nowadays that's also very personal, very easy to think about because we're all concerned about it. Then the question would be to try to take the other categories which aren't automatically personal and make them personal. So for example, you say Shema and you are, among other things, pledging allegiance to a Kodesh Baruch Hu. You're saying, you're my king and I'm your servant. And ask yourself, well, let's see, I said Shema 12 hours ago. The minimum you're supposed to say Shema is twice a day. What has happened to me in the last 12 hours? What kinds of life have I lived? What have I done? What resources do I have that enable me to do what I do? What did I accomplish? Where's that all coming from? That's all coming from divine providence that is caring for my life step by step and detail by detail. So if I think in terms of what it has meant to me personally, then it's easy for me to identify with it and to keep it in mind. Because for most of us, what's going on in our own lives is very important, if not uppermost. Dale Carnegie, who wrote that famous book, what is the subject that every person is most interested in? Himself. And you can test this. You come meet a person and you're going to have a conversation, start asking him questions about himself. The conversation could go on for an hour and he won't notice that you've said nothing. He won't even notice it. Because he's able to talk about himself. That's it. He's already on a cloud. So if you make it personal in that way, it's easy to focus on, and it's absolutely genuine, because all those things are definitely part of what it means. That's one piece of advice. As I said before, you should ask other people. Yeah.
What do you think about learning secular studies other than strictly Jewish studies? Would you rather recommend anything that's worthwhile and add it to your studies?
Okay, this is learning secular studies is a big subject. There's a variety of views on it. I will just mention to you what the Maral says. The Derech Chaim, he says, I'm sorry, Yeshivat Torah, Parak Yud Dalet, he says that it is a mitzvah and a chiyuv. It's a mitzvah and a chiyuv to learn subjects other than Torah. And one proof he brings from it is this. We have two blessings when you see people who are great scholars. There are two blessings to make depending upon what they are scholars of. If they're scholars of Torah, we describe it as God shared His Torah with those who fear Him. Shechalak mechachmaso lireyav. And when you're speaking about a person who is a scholar of a non-Torah subject, then you say, Nosan mechachmaso lebasav adam. He gave from his wisdom to flesh and blood. So ask the Maharal, could you imagine, after making that blessing, that you'd be told you can't study it? That blessing says it's God's wisdom. You say, oh no, but you can't study this, God's wisdom. His prayer by God's wisdom, you can't study. And He did us a giant favor by giving us from His wisdom. And we should just turn our backs on that? Maharal says that's inconceivable. It's inconceivable. So he calls it a mitzvah and a chiyuv. Now, how much and what time and what particular subjects, all that has to be discussed. There are certain subjects which are inherently heretical. That has to be discussed. I'm not saying that it's forbidden. I'm saying it has to be discussed. Rambam obviously tells us explicitly that he read rafts and rafts of heretical material. And even though he says in the Mishnah Torah that material about idol worship is forbidden to read, since he himself says that he read it, it can't be that there aren't exceptions. There are exceptions. And the standard exception is that if you are a member of the Sanhedrin and someone's accused of having worshipped an idol, how will you judge his case unless you know what constitutes idol worship in that religion? So obviously it can't be absolutely forbidden to read these things. And things about the age of the universe and things about evolution and so forth and so on. It needs to be asked. For some people, it's appropriate. For some people, it might even be necessary. For some people, it might be useful. But the idea of putting a blanket prohibition on it seems to be an incorrect idea. Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman writes that reading philosophy or other subjects for recreation is perfectly acceptable. And he says that he had in his house Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, which is maybe the most difficult, most abstruse work of the last 300 years in philosophy, and was extremely foundational in its time. It's still very, very influential. And he had it in his house in the bathroom. Exactly right. And he read it in the bathroom. But he didn't say, it's treif, I can't touch it. So each particular subject has to be asked, and whether the heretical material is explicit, or whether it's just implicit or just implied, all these questions have to be asked. And the answer will be different for different people. Yeah.
Subject, do you have Stoicism? Do you think there's anything that you could learn from the Roman?
You see, the problem with the Stoicism is they had a philosophy, but a lot of the philosophy was recommending a certain way of life. They had a method for dealing with pain. Now, it's true that the Gemara says, if someone will tell you there's wisdom among the nations of the world, believe them. If someone will tell you there's Torah among the nations of the world, don't believe them. So that's certainly correct. But here, when they're telling you how to live, let me go back to 10 seconds. In other words, when this kind of chokhmah could be conditional. Here's how you accomplish X. Instructions for accomplishing something. That doesn't tell you what you should accomplish. If you should happen to want to accomplish X, here are ways to do it. It's all what Kant called a hypothetical imperative. But that means somewhere else you're going to find out what you should be going for. And then you'll know what in the non-Jewish handbook you should look at as the means that are relevant to you. And it's Torah tells you what you're going for. So then they're just helping you do what the Torah told you that you should do. But not all non-Jewish scholarly works are like that. And Stoicism is a picture of a certain way of life which is supposed to be ideal in certain ways. Well, that's another thing. That's telling you what the goal should be. Not just how to make more money or how to get efficient sneakers. It's what you should be doing in the end. That already is something which you should be very, very suspicious of. Very suspicious of. Yeah.
Why in prayers do we sometimes refer to God in first person and sometimes in third person?
That's a very important question. Why do we sometimes refer to God in second person and why in third person? I remember when I was introduced to this, I was waiting for a chance to speak to my Rabbi Zatzal in Boston, and he had 3,000 books in his house. And I took one randomly off the shelf. I was probably several years in, maybe 10 years in, but I was still learning. I was a beginner, and I didn't know the sefer. I opened it up, and the sefer made this point. And I thought, man, I speak Hebrew, and I didn't even notice. Boy, did I feel bad. I think of myself as sort of alive and alert and critical. Okay, so now it's a very deep thing, and there's a lot of Kabbalah on it, but I'll just tell you the initial thing. Let's think for a moment about second and third person. You versus he. What's the difference exactly between second and third person? What's the big difference when you use the word you, and the word he? What difference does it make? Well, here's a crucial difference. You can only be said to someone who's present. You can only use YOU to refer to someone who is present. HE can be used to refer to someone who isn't present. Well, Kadosh Baruch Hu relates to the world in two different ways. One is that he reveals himself in the world, so that if you were at that time and place, you could definitely say you, with open miracles, with prophecy. And then there are times and places where God doesn't reveal himself openly, where he hides himself. The Torah itself calls it Hester Panim, hiding the face. Hiding the face can mean you have a mask on. It doesn't mean you're not there. You're there, you put on a mask, and no one can identify you. So God deals with us both in a revealed way and in a hidden way. And if you look carefully, for example, at Birkat HaMazon when you're benching, or when you look at the first two blessings before the Shema, and when you look at Kiddush, you'll see that third person is associated with creation and nature, and second person is associated with the Exodus from Egypt, and the giving of the Torah, and the entry into the land of Israel, and the plagues in Egypt. And it's consistent. Now, when you talk about creation, I will remind you of something you all know, that man was last. And since man was last, he didn't witness any of the creation. The creation is a story that HaKadosh Baruch Hu shared with us, the information about what events took place, but no one witnessed it. So in the process of creation, it wasn't present. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't open. It wasn't observed. Nature is precisely the description of the world which is repetitive, categorized, constant, which you could have an illusion about, carries itself, operates on an automatic pilot, operates on blind mechanical forces. No one could say that at the revelation of Sinai. No one could say that at the splitting of the sea. No one could say that when Moses says frogs, and the place is inundated with frogs. So there are times when God runs a world in which we don't see him, and there are times in which he runs a world in which we do see him. So what we want is to express this dual relationship with God, and that's why the rabbis who created the prayers, the rabbis put in every blessing, they put in both second and third person. Because part of it is to relate to where Kadosh Baruch Hu shows himself to us, and part of it is to relate to where Kadosh Baruch Hu transcends us. And I'll give you an emblem of this. This is a very long story. I'm just taking, a little nuggets off the top. The word mitzvah. So if we compare the word mitzvah with the proper name of God, the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, the last two letters are the same, Vav and Hey. Now, the first two letters in mitzvah are mem, tzadi. There is a coding of Hebrew letters, which goes back to the Talmud, where you associate the first letter with the last letter, the second letter with the next to last letter, the third letter with the third from last letter. That's the way you associate the letters. And then, under certain circumstances, you switch a letter for its associated letter. So if you do that, mem is 10 from the end. So if I switch it, going 10 from the beginning, it's Yud. And Tzadi is 5 from the end. So I go from the beginning 5, it is Hey. So really mitzvah is the name of God. Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, but the first two letters are in code. And the second two letters are explicit. And that means when you look at the word mitzvah, you see both dimensions, both aspects. And that's why one of the means of mitzvah is connection. Tzav in Hebrew means to connect. You connect to Kadosh Baruch Hu, you connect in both dimensions. The word mitzvah becomes a picture of connecting in both dimensions. So this is a very, very deep idea. I have a whole shir where I go through, got 2 hours worth, where I go through the various prayers and how the subjects are distributed, and there's some subtleties there, somewhere in the my recorded stuff. But it's a very, very fundamental idea. Yeah.
Just to tap onto the prayer, in the nighttime Shema, I also think I can get a bit of clarity on what this means. It says, he will command his angels for you to protect you in all your ways. They will carry you on palms, lest you strike your foot against a stone. You will tread up the lion and the viper. You will trample the young lion and the serpent. I already know what that means.
Well, first of all, it's poetry.
Yeah.
And the idea is that you'll be immune, for as it says, 1,000 on the right side and 10,000 on the left side, and you won't get hurt. So this is a way of expressing immunity. Also, it means that if people set themselves up against you, then they're going to be crushed. So it talks about your heel and so forth and so on. Those things would be more in the poetry side than in the general meaning side. But poetry, from our point of view, is very important. You express things in a way. You reach a portion of the inner spiritual life of a person through poetry that you don't reach with other things. King David, by the way, when I first became religious, I'm saying this because I use the word poetry, and that can be misleading. I thought to myself, well, King David wrote Psalms. He didn't. He edited it. There were 10 authors, but he edited it. He wrote a lot of them. This must be exalted poetry. I'll read it. And it really didn't do anything for me. And for years, I couldn't figure out, why isn't this poetry working the way poetry works? Until I realized it's not poetry in the Western sense. It's not something to stimulate your feelings and give you a vicarious experience. That's not what King David's Psalms are about. It's rather, when you're having the experience, this gives you the ability to express the experience in words. Words that are exalted, words that are ultimately true, words that plumb the depths of the experience. But it's not to create the experience, it's to express the experience. That's a different story altogether. When a person has supreme happiness, there are Psalms for that. When a person is in trouble and worried, there are Psalms for that. When a person has a loss, there are Psalms for that. So it's a very different picture of what the Psalms are supposed to be doing. But here, it's an exalted expression of the idea that because you're close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Rambam is medaik there, ki yodash mi, because he knows my name. And that's a very, very, for the Rambam, it's a very deep relationship of connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because he knows my name, I'm going to protect him and make sure that he's invulnerable that way. When the king Chizkiah lived through the defeat of Sancheriv, it's the defeat of his whole army. Chazal tell us, if he had said Shira, and Shira means poetry, not music. You're aware of that. Shira and Shira in Hebrew mean poetry. And when you read in the English translation Shira as song, 200 years ago in English, S-O-N-G meant poetry. Had nothing to do with music. And in Hebrew, the word for music is mizmor. Zemer, so mizmor, shir is not redundant. Mizmor means music, and shir means poetry. So the Chazal tell us, since he didn't say Shira in commemoration of the victory over Sancheriv, he wasn't Mashiach. Otherwise, he would have been Mashiach. So creating Shira is extremely, extremely important. It's not to be taken for granted at all. So, and then of course there are endless commentaries. Rav Hirsch wrote a complete commentary on the whole book of Psalms, and Rav Hirsch is, not to reduce anybody else, but Hirsch is top of the world. So, if you want to get into a Psalm, it's a good place to look.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Yeah.
How are we supposed to relate to the 9 days, especially now with the current situation?
First of all, my Rebbe Zatzal used to make a distinction between two phrases in Chazal, and one is very, very widely used and studied and expressed, and the other much less so, and they're really two halves of a whole. One is Zecher l'Churban, remembering the destruction. So during the year, we have certain things that we do, which are to keep this idea alive. When you break the glass at a wedding, and many will put ashes on the forehead of the chassan, or if a house is built for a Jew, if you buy an already built house, you don't have to do this, but if it's built for a Jew, then it's customary to leave a 1 amma by 1 amma square of the wall unfinished, so, as a memory of the destruction of the temple. And of course, there are the fast days during the year, which are to remember the destruction of the temple. And the memory is like, my life is incomplete. I'm missing a lot. And that's something that in every prayer we pray for the rebuilding of the temple. Shabbos, Yom Tov, every time. Ritzei is about rebuilding the temple. So we feel that loss. Now you imagine if you have someone that you're close to and the person passes on to the next world, and then every year on his yard site, you go to his grave. We would say, Tehillim there, Psalms there. Well, you go to the grave and you're there where the person's body is buried. Don't say where he's buried. That's a terrible mistake. The body is buried there. But then we go there, so all the old feelings come up, and all the feelings of loss and missing the person come up, and that's right. That's what should happen. So in a way, the 9 days, and then, by the way, the whole of the 3 weeks is like mourning for a lost one reversed. The 3 weeks is like the whole year, and then 9 days is like the month, and the week of it is like the week, the 7 days of Shiva, and then Tisha B'Av itself, in a certain sense, is like Mesol Lefanov. It's like what's called an Onani. He's a person who's not yet buried, the person who does it, and that's why some say, why you don't put on tefillin in the morning, those who don't. There are those who do, but those who don't. Because when a person hasn't yet buried his dead, he doesn't put on tefillin, doesn't do positive mitzvos. So it's like reverse. The idea is it builds up from the more superficial to the more poignant. So it's like going back to the grave and going back and sort of confronting the loss directly. confronting in a way where that's what's in your mind. Nothing else is in your mind at that moment. So then if a person, let's say, loses a parent, okay, you get on with your life and you're doing the things that you're doing, but when you go back to the grave on the yard site, that's all you're thinking about. You're thinking about the parent. The parent has left the world. You don't have the inspiration and the love of being together with the parent, and that causes you sadness, as it should. So that's one thing. Then in our period, there's a Gemara, a few Gemaras which indicate that all the blessings that we enjoyed in the world came to us through the temple. So that with the loss of the temple, all of the other blessings either are absent or are much, much reduced. So now it's a question of thinking, it's not just this happened and I don't have it, but my life is directly affected by it. My life is reduced, challenged, under stress because of the things that I don't have. I'll give you just one example. At the end of every prayer, we again ask for the rebuilding of the temple. What we say is, Yiratzon, She'ibana Beis HaMikdash B'Meher Ameinu, that it may your will that the temple be built quickly in our days. V'sein Chalkeinu V'Sorasecha, and give us our portion in the Torah. V'shamna Avarecha B'Ira Ki Mei Olam Shon Kabanios, and there we'll serve you in awe as we did in previous generations. So, hold on. How does this work exactly? Okay, you made the prayer, said the prayer, and prayer and sacrifices are corresponding to one another, and they fulfill one another. We've spoken about this a number of times. Okay, so I can understand that we have the prayer, we don't have the sacrifice, we ought to have the sacrifices. So let's pray for the rebuilding the temple. But why, in the middle, do we ask for a portion in Hashem's Torah? What's that doing there? That's in the middle. I think it's a very funny thing. Please rebuild the temple, the result of which will be we'll get our share in the Torah, yeah, and we'll offer sacrifices the other way we used to. So it's a very funny thing. Well, it turns out that among many other things, the temple was a communication of Torah to the world. And one proof of it is the Sanhedrin. Where did the Sanhedrin sit officially? In a place called Lishkas Agozis. Now, if you have the periphery of the courtyard of the temple, okay, there's a certain spot where there was a building that straddled the periphery. Part of it was inside and part of it was outside the periphery of the temple. And that's where the Sanhedrin sat. What are they doing there? And by the way, as long as they sat there, then Jewish courts throughout the world could judge capital cases. The minute that was no longer their residence, which happened, I guess, in the 2nd century, and then they went to 9 different places in Golos, they couldn't do that anymore. Why? Because the Torah comes into the world in large part through the temple. And therefore they're sitting there on the border of the temple. So when we don't have the Beis HaMikdash, that means that the pipeline of Torah to the world is disturbed. So I say, let's say you're learning Torah, you're learning a Torah passage and it's difficult, lots of them are difficult, and you're beating your head over it, you're not getting anywhere, and you go home frustrated, you and your chavusa, we didn't get it. What should you think in the next prayer? Well, one of the reasons you didn't get it is because the temple isn't there. That's one of the reasons. So when you pray and you think of asking for the rebuilding of the temple, you should think, please, I want to understand your Torah. I want to know it. I want to incorporate it, and I'm not getting it. Please rebuild the temple so that I can have a share in your Torah. That's what's going on with that Yehirotzo. So that's another aspect. I'm talking now about relating it to your everyday life and feeling the loss in your everyday life and thinking of wanting that to be recovered. That's one half. That's called Zeichel HaChurban. But then there's something else called Zeichel HaMikdash. Remembering the temple itself. Where does that come up? Well, And the night of the Seder, when you get finally to the point of eating matzah and eating morah, you eat the Hillel sandwich. Matzah and morah together. This is what Hillel did. Zecha l'mikdash kehillel. What's that? Are we introducing an element of mourning into the Passover Seder? No, we are not. We're doing what he did. Why are we doing what he did? We're not sitting in the temple. The answer is because something of the temple is still here. It's still with us. We can still relate to it. We can still actualize it. And the Chachamim chose times and places in which to be able to do that. You take a lulav and esrog for 7 days minus Shabbos, as you probably know. That's odd. If you look at the biblical mitzvah, the only place where the lulav and esrog were taken for 7 days was in the temple. Everywhere else it was only the first day. It was established. Do it everywhere for 7 days minus Shabbos. Zecher l'mikdash. That's not putting mourning into sukkahs. We're not sad and unhappy for the loss of no, there's something left. So you prioritize the temple in two ways. You mourn its destruction, and then you celebrate what is left of it, what element of that's left of it, you celebrate it by performing something in its name. So those two have to be put together. The Rabbi Zatzal talked about this, he even published an essay on it, and it's a two-edged sword. It's also, in a certain sense, a Hasidic idea, Simcha has to be there someplace. Simcha has to be there someplace. Why is that? Oh, you Hasidim, you're always inventing things. Well, King David said, Ivdu Hashem b'simcha. When you serve a Kodesh Baruch Hu, you should serve him with joy. That means everything has to have an aspect of joy. Everything. Otherwise, you're not doing a vote the proper way. Okay. What's noch? Yeah.
Book of Psalms, they're mostly attributed to Dovid, but some of them are not from Dovid. So I'm just curious how they were able to be added in. Who made that decision?
King David was the editor. He edited this one, which some say was from Moses, and one from Bnei Korach, and several from Asaph. And these are people beforehand who made these things, and he incorporated them into the Book of Psalms.
They're all before his time.
Yeah, and the Gemara says that he edited it. And I must tell you, going to that Gemara the last time, I'm not 100% clear now whether they, or sometimes they may have written a whole poem, and sometimes in the poetry that he wrote, he was quoting things they said. Both types, I think, are there. In both cases, he's using other people's material. Yeah.
So this is something that I've been personally dealing with, and I've talked to some of the guys, and I feel like it's a bigger point for people who did not grow up religious, but are becoming religious, that there were specific times or instances that made us come to religion. We didn't just have this moment that we were like, oh, I want to be religious now, or I'm becoming religious. Like, there were things that happened, and how do you keep moving forward on those things when you might not experience those same levels of eye-opening or same experiences that make you want to be closer to religion. So as you learn more, how do you, like, I would say a good example is like for the fast that we just had on 17th of Tammuz, like I did fast and I was trying to learn about it, but to be honest, I didn't eat what I would say is for reasons that I don't understand and that I don't feel a personal connection to. So how do you keep moving forward on these things where you might not know, and it's hard to understand why you do it?
Okay, I'm beginning to hear that the beginning of the question is really not the heart of the question. Even if you grew up in a religious family, there'll be some things that you don't know the reason for, and you could ask the same question: how do I relate to things that I don't know the reason for? So I think there are a few things to be said here. And again, it's a psychological question. You should ask other people as well. I was once challenged as follows. This is very poignant. You're saying words in the prayer. You think of yourself as addressing the creator of the universe. But suppose I don't mean them. Please rebuild the temple. Do I really want animal sacrifices? I don't know. It's a little weird. And people, tell me that it's not nice and it's unkind, and maybe animals have rights along with streams and toothpicks. I don't know. So now, am I not being hypocritical and dishonest by saying those words if I don't really mean them? It's a good question. It's a thoughtful, serious question. So my parable on this is the following. You go to the doctor, he does a checkup, he says, listen, you have a problem. It's not terrible. There's a medicine for it. You take the medicine for 6 months and it'll go away. Here's the prescription. Take the medicine. You say, fine. You go to the pharmacist, you give the prescription, and he says, see, okay, we have this stuff. Could I ask you a personal question? You say, well, you could ask. Maybe I won't answer. And he says, do you really want this stuff? You honestly and sincerely want this stuff? Do you know what it's for? Do you know what it's made of? Do you know what it does? Gee golly, I don't, actually. Yeah, I don't know what it's for. I know what it's made of. I know what the trials were like. I don't know. I really don't. So the pharmacist says to me, so you're a hypocrite. You're not an honest person. You're not sincere. Do I have an answer for him? Sure, I have an answer. My doctor told me I need it. I don't have to go to medical school to be honest and sincere in asking for medicine that my doctor told me I need. It's just that I trust him when he tells me I need it. And it's appropriate to trust him because he's trained, because he's qualified, because he has experience. So doing something on the basis that someone with appropriate authority authorized it is enough for me to be sincere and honest and genuine in doing it. Okay, now we come to the sacrifices. A person can say, I don't get it. I don't see why slaughtering sacrifices and putting that blood on the altar and all the rest. I don't see how it works. I don't see what it does. But the creator of the universe is telling me that it's important. I trust him. If he says it's important, it's important. And I'm asking for it because I know it's important because he told me so, even though if I don't know why it's important. And that being the case, I'm asking for it because I really want it because I think it's important. By the way, you have this in war also. The platoon will get a command. Climb that hill and shoot due north. What is due north? Why that hill? Why not in the valley? Why us? Why not somebody else? I don't know. The orders came down from headquarters. That's what you have to do. Is a person insincere or dishonest in following orders? I don't think so. The general supposedly knows what he's doing. He's supposed to know what he's doing. He's in charge. Coordination of forces is what makes a war winnable. And I'm doing it because of that. So I don't think you have to know. And indeed, there can be a special spiritual quality, a special kind of relationship to Kodesh Baruch Hu in doing what you don't know. This is what they say about chukim, right? Ribono Shel Olam, look, I'm showing you, I trust you, I believe in you. I take your word as my reality. And you told me this is important to do. I'm doing it because you said, because I need to do it. So I think that can be in itself a bridge building a connection to a Kodesh Baruch Hu. But it is true that we are commanded to study the rules and to learn the reasons and understand them in depth, and also, to the extent that we can, have them in mind when we do the commandments. And that's something which it's a lifelong project where you should enrich your understanding and enrich your experience of what's going on. If you look in the Siddur, before you put on talis and before you put on the tefillin, there's a whole long page of meditation. Meditation written from a Kabbalistic point of view about some of what's going on when you do it. Some people read that whole paragraph because they want to have that in mind when they do the mitzvah. And that's certainly only appropriate. It's very positive. So I think that the attitude of doing His will and expressing your loyalty to Him when you do that is one meaning that you can have right away, and then you should invest in understanding the reasons for the commandments in greater depth. Both of them are helpful.
To your point, that was the person who reads the words but doesn't necessarily mean it. That can be applied to actions as well. That they do the actions but don't mean it.
Yeah, but see now I've modified the description now, because what I pointed out is that even without personal understanding of the reason for which it's being done, I do mean it. I do mean it. Again, if someone challenges me and says, "You're dishonest, you're a hypocrite, you're insincere," I say to him, "No, you're mistaken. I'm honest, I'm sincere, I do mean it. It's just, I mean it because he said I have to do it. That's why I mean it. So I'm not saying you should do it when you don't mean it. I'm pointing out that you really do mean it. That's
How much is okay to do in that light? Or how long is it okay to do it in that light?
It's okay if you did everything in that light till the end of your life. Nothing, you have not failed at anything. You haven't enriched your performance in a way that it should be enriched, but you've satisfied the commandments. You've done what the commandments say. It's the essence of a mitzvah. I know, you see, all this stuff is not politically correct, but so what? The essence of a mitzvah is that it's a commandment, which means there's a commander, and he said I should do it, and I'm saluting and saying yes sir and doing it. That's the connection. The rest is adding my mind to the connection, putting my mind also in his service and so forth and so on. But the connection is there, and I get credit for doing it, and I got a reward for doing it. Yeah.
I think the first part of the discussion was also important of this idea of, I've heard it phrased in a different way, of this idea of first light and second light, that Hashem kind of reveals himself to you in a grandiose way. You might see it in that way, and then how do you continue to have that relationship once you had that big moment where you saw God's in your life? How do you continue to have that?
Yeah, I should. Okay, that's going back to the beginning of the question. You see, and not everybody starts like that. Not everybody starts with a great revelation or a great experience that turns them around. I didn't start like that. I don't think I'm totally alone. I was brought up Reform, and a combination of circumstances revealed to me that Reform Judaism of the 1950s, before your grandparents were born, lied to me and hid things from me, which I resented terribly. Because at the beginning I trusted them because I know any better. And then I made a resolution to make an exploration. I don't like things to be hid from me. I don't sort of say, don't look at that, don't study that, don't read that. And I went back to university in my sophomore year, and I made an investigation, and it was a matter of accumulating small and medium-sized points over a 2-year period. There was no like, oh wow, it didn't happen to me. So I think I'm not alone in that. So what you're talking about was never a problem for me. I was working gradually and working through objections. I took courses from professors who were teaching Jewish subjects from an anti-Torah point of view, and I had fellow students who were astonished and scandalized by my behavior. Like one of them said to me when he saw me with the yarmulke, "Who do you think you are, the Pope?" That was his Jewish comment. And then I had my Rabbi and my Rebbe's congregation. I've written this all up on my website. Where I went and asked them the questions and got answers, and the answers were so far beyond the questions that were raised. But I did this over a 2-year period. And then I spent a year in yeshiva. There was no great moment of it. So it was a gradual accumulation of more and more insights, more and more understanding, more and more depth. So it was naturally growing. It was growing automatically. Now, I think that you ought to think of this as part of normal growth. I'm a philosopher, so one of the jokes we make about people is that, do you really believe that 2 + 2 is 4 because you were taught it in 2nd grade and you believed the teacher? Is that why today you believe 2 + 2 is 4? Probably not. She said so, and you know that you'd get a check rather than a red X if you put it down on the paper. That's how you started when you were 7 years old. But now that you're 23, your understanding of math and the world is much, much richer than it was before. So you're not stuck with what you got at 7. As you grow, the very same material gets reworked and reviewed and re-understood, and you get deeper and deeper connections to the very same material. Now, if you started with a dramatic experience, that's not likely to happen often. That's quite right. But then I think you have to be thankful for the kickoff, and then try to shift gears to a train more similar to mine, where as you go and you get another insight and another element. To me, it's still thrilling. I've been down the road a long ways. Just on Shabbos, I was working with a certain verse and a certain Rashi, and something that I had said, and then all of a sudden, it all fit together. It all fit together like a perfect puzzle. And I knew this Rashi, and I knew these ideas for a long time. I had said it to my chavrusa 2 nights before, and the night before. So it's thrilling to see how it all fits together. Each part supports the other part. Each part enriches the other part, informs the other part. So those are the things which, for me, continue to contribute to my connection to things. And then, by the way, when you study Torah, one criterion of what you should study when you study Torah is that at least some of it should be inspiring. So, and that will be different for different people. So, last couple of years, I've started studying Maharal seriously, which was terribly frustrating for I had a good chavrusa for 40 years, and he was very much in Maharal, and I couldn't get anything out of it. My President Rebbitzin was also very big in Maharal, pushed me to start learning that. I'm learning it very seriously. And I'm a philosopher, and he's a philosopher, and a Kabbalist, and everything else. And it's I'm on fire because I'm learning new things all the time, and I'm coming to appreciate how he looked at the world. So that's, for me, very exciting. For you, it could be, I was in Denver a number of years ago. The Rebbitzin there reaches out to women who are not religiously trained and knowledgeable, and she uses a book. It's called, in English, Journey to Virtue. It's a translation of a book on practical halacha. Practical halacha. And she uses the laws of Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara is where you say things about other people which are denigrating but true. So it's not libel, it's true, but you shouldn't say it anyway. And she said, she found, and when you talk to women especially, you shouldn't say things about other people that are not nice, even if they're true. First of all, they're shocked. And they think, what percentage of my vocabulary is left? What percentage of my conversations is left? Right? And they think, wow, I'm supposed to be so caring, so sensitive, that I wouldn't even say something about someone that could be denigrating to him. Like the Chofetz Chaim says in his introduction to his masterwork on the subject, would you do that with your brother? Suppose somebody asks you about your brother. Hey, how's your brother's diet? Would you say, well, he has a drinking problem? I don't think you would. He's your brother. You wouldn't talk that way about your brother. Right? That's right. Because with your brother, you have a certain special sensitivity that you don't want to say things about him that aren't nice things. Well, the Torah says that has sensitivity should apply to all Jews, not just to your brother. So when they read that, when they hear that, and they think of themselves as nice people, and they are nice people. They're nice people. That's why hearing this affects them. And they think, but I never thought of that. I never dreamt of that. That's a level of sensitivity, of morality that, and then they think, wow, the Torah has in it things that are really high, noble, challenging, and beautiful. So if that's something that appeals to you, then that's something else that you could learn and get an inspiration from. But to find what does that for you? Yeah.
From a logical point of view, I'm curious when to use the strongest evidence that Hashem exists and He gave us the Torah.
It's hard to make rankings of evidence. It's not as a scale of points and so forth and so on. But there are a number of things. I wrote a book about the revelation of Sinai, called Reason to Believe, which hopefully will be reprinted in the near future. And there, I think I have a very strong argument that the revelation of Sinai took place. But it's long and it's a bit complicated. But here's something that you might take into account, and it's something you can share with other people as well. In the ancient world, all the scientists and all the philosophers and all the mathematicians believed the world has no beginning. Not talking about people who were affected by us or Christianity or Islam, but they all believed it has no beginning. And they had arguments for it, though, as Maimonides points out, they weren't conclusive. And even Aristotle didn't think they were conclusive, but they were strong. So strong that when Einstein created relativity, and he saw that according to his equations, the universe as a whole isn't stable, it could be changing, that he changed the equations. He put in what he called the cosmological constant. It's called the cosmological constant because it keeps the cosmos constant and doesn't let it change. Why? Because nobody ever saw it change. Nobody ever saw anything happen to it. In all of human history, nothing has happened to the cosmos. So what are you going to do? Tell me, but it really could change? That's nuts. So he changed his equations, and he called it the worst mistake of his career because he could have predicted the expansion or contraction of the universe. He could have predicted it. Much better than predicting the light going by the sun and being deflected. So that's how strong it was. Then came the expansion of the universe. Golly, getting bigger all the time, hey? So that means yesterday it was smaller. The day before that it was even smaller. Smaller, smaller, smaller. How far back could that go? You can't be smaller than zero. So if it's going back, it's getting smaller all the time. Doesn't that mean there has to be a beginning? Yes, sort of, but you can't accept that. It's impossible to accept that it has a beginning. So they concocted something called the steady state theory, which you can Google. And the steady state theory accommodated expansion without a beginning. Very clever idea. Here's what they said. When you say expansion, what you mean is things are getting further away from one another, right? Well, guess what? Space is infinitely big. So there's plenty of room. They're not going to run out of room. They're getting further and further away from one another. They're just doing that into infinite space, right? You say, but if that's true and the world has no beginning, then they ought to be infinitely apart, right? No, listen to this. New stuff is coming into the universe out of nowhere all the time. Constant creation of new matter, energy all the time. Of course, you won't wake up one morning, go out to your garden and see a new petunia in your backyard because it's something like 1 electron per cubic meter of space per century. So you're not going to see that. But that's it. And there's no beginning. No beginning. Stephen Hawking writes in A Brief History of Time, why were we so against the beginning? Because the beginning smacks of a creator. If it began, you want to know what made it begin. If it's always been there, then just has always been there, right? Okay, this was the situation until 1965. What happened in 1965? Well, two people who worked for they were trying to build a radio receiver. His name was Penzias and Wilson. Arnold Penzias and something Edward Wilson. They were trying to build a radio receiver without static. No static at all. This thing, you see a picture of it, it's like 10 feet tall and 30 feet long with curved surfaces and different things, and they couldn't get rid of the static. Winter, summer, north, east, south, southwest, daytime, nighttime, cold, hot. There was this background static that they couldn't get rid of. So they published a paper. And we have that static, we don't understand it. Among other people, James Peebles at Princeton picked up the paper, and he said, okay, listen, we have two pictures of the universe. One is the created one we made, the steady state where space is infinite, things are separating, new stuff's coming in the middle, and it's going on like that forever, and will continue forever, no beginning and no end. That's one picture. But there's the other picture which we were against, the other picture we're trying to avoid, where really, the universe is getting smaller and smaller because things are getting further apart. So in the past they were closer together until they come all together at the beginning. Well, when you push things together, they get hot. Pressure produces heat. That's why it's called the Big Bang, because the further back you get, the more pressure things were in together, the hotter it was. And then somehow there's a start, and then because it's hot, it expands and it cools off. Right? So 13 billion years ago was all pushed together, was very, very hot, and now it's been expanding for 13 billion years, and there's a little heat left over. So they calculated, if the Big Bang really took place, how much heat should be left over in the universe from the Big Bang. It turned out to be exactly the amount of heat that would produce the static in the radio receiver. The radio receiver proved that the steady state theory is wrong and the Big Bang theory is right, which means the universe has a beginning against all educated thought for thousands of years. Golly, our book begins with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Hey, what did people think before 1965? These people are old, they're ignorant, they're superstitious, they made up stories, had nothing to do. All of a sudden, bang. Ha! The universe does have a beginning. That's really kind of remarkable, You wouldn't expect that from primitives living 3,000 years ago or making up stories around campfires. How does it that Torah got it right and the whole of the educated scientific world got it wrong for thousands of years? That's worth asking. Even Stephen Hawking said, we don't want a beginning because it sounds like there's something that made it happen. And it does, doesn't it? I mean, it didn't happen by itself, didn't bring itself into existence. So I think that a person, could stop and think, well, maybe there's something to think about here. If this book got it right, maybe there's something in this book more that's worth studying. There's a fellow named Jastrow who's an astronomer. He was at Dartmouth. He wrote a book about the Big Bang and other things, and he had a cartoon of a mountain, and cosmologists are climbing up the mountain, and there are various different ways, different levels on the mountain, and one is just pulling himself over the top, and sitting on the top of the mountain are already people who are studying the Bible and saying, welcome. We've been here on the top of the mountain for thousands of years because we knew there was a beginning, and you're just getting it now. So I think that's quite dramatic. Those are two things to keep in mind. Okay.